Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IAS English. In our today's video, we are going to understand why has been the end of Russia-Ukraine war or achieving the end of Russia-Ukraine war proven to be so difficult in recent times. Now, the notes that I will be using in this particular session, in case if you want to download them for obviously future references, you can do so by going to a particular Telegram channel. And this is called as ATS Live. And while you're in this channel downloading the notes, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button also. Okay. So let us start by understanding what are we going to discuss today. And as the name of this video suggests, obviously we are going to discuss about the Russia's prolonged war with Ukraine and how has it affected the geopolitics not just of this region but of the entire globe. Now, why are we discussing Russia-Ukraine war? The reason is that this war has been going on for a greater part of 3.5 years. And despite such a prolonged war, there is no end to this conflict. Why? Because no parties involved, be it these parties, want to achieve peace. And what are the military factors, what are the political factors, what are the historical factors, and what are the geopolitical and geostrategic factors? We are going to discuss this in today's video. Now, having said this, there has been multiple attempts to end this war. But despite these multiple events, there have been factors that has contributed not to end but to continue this war. So we are going to discuss each and every factor in detail in our today's video. Okay. Now first let us pick up the military factors, and this particular military factor starts with the territorial deadlock. Now, in present times, Russia, it controls roughly the 20% of Ukraine's territory, which includes many important regions of Ukraine, include Crimean Peninsula, includes Donbas, includes Zaporizhia, and it includes Kherson. So from this map, you can understand these are the regions which have been highlighted in pink. These are the regions which have been under Russian control. And all of this region belongs to sovereign country of Ukraine, right? So this is the particular factor that once Russia is able to control such a substantial portion of Ukraine, it is not willing to give up on this claim. On the other hand, Ukraine, it refuses to accept any territorial loss. So to end this war, you need to understand there has to be a ceasefire. So first of all, Russia is unwilling to do ceasefire because it wants to control more of Ukrainian territory. And Ukraine refuses to sign a ceasefire deal because it wants to liberate these areas out of the Russian control. So this has led to a zero-sum stance. Zero-sum stance means both of them are not willing to accept the status quo in the region. And that is why it has been seen as a risk not just on one side. Suppose if one side agrees to end this war right now, it would be a political loss for both of these countries. So this is the first military factor. Let us understand the second military factor. Now you need to understand it hasn't been so that others hasn't helped Ukraine to get these areas back. Obviously, the West led by US has done everything possible. They have provided monetary support, they have provided military support to Ukraine, although indirectly, so that Ukraine can utilize those infrastructure, Ukraine can utilize those means to liberate those areas out of Russian control. And to minimize Russian casualties, the Russian military and the government is using drones and missiles, whereas Ukraine has been continuously targeting Russia's critical supply lines, be it conducting attacks on Russia's important oil refineries. Now, what has happened that neither side has achieved a decisive military victory soon. So that is why on the outset, both of these parties are too weak to achieve a decisive military edge, and at the same time they are also very strong, which has allowed them to prolong this war, which has allowed them to continue this war for long. So these were military factors that we have discussed. Now let us understand the political factors. What are the political factors behind why has this war continued for so long? Now you need to understand Vladimir Putin, who is the president of Russia. He rules over an authoritarian regime, and for an authoritarian leader, his position in the country, not just in the country but in the entire globe, it becomes very important for him. So suppose if Russia is not able to achieve a decisive military gain in this particular war, it would be seen as reducing the stature of Putin in his domestic politics, and not just in domestic politics but in the global scheme of things. And similarly, he rules over an authoritarian regime. So when an authoritarian regime is not able to get maximum gains, it would also reduce the legitimacy of his rule. So this is the reason why Vladimir Putin and Russia in particular is not willing to give up on its gain that they have made in this war. Now let us come back to Ukraine. Ukraine, the president of Ukraine is Vladimir Zelensky. And for Vladimir Zelensky, he has came to power to be able to stand up against one of the most authoritarian leaders in the world, that is Vladimir Putin, right? So for Vladimir Zelensky to maintain his domestic credibility, to maintain his image, it is very essential for him to push back against the Russian aggression, and this has not been able to achieve because of the military factors we have already discussed. Now, other parties in this conflict, particularly the Western nations like US, they have provided monetary support, they have provided military support to Ukraine for their efforts against Russia. But now these countries also, their political leaders are facing electoral pressures. When you're bleeding so much cash, you're bleeding so much arms and ammunition, it creates a domestic political pressure on Western leaders that until when you are going to support Ukraine. So that is why they are facing electoral pressure and war fatigue. Now what has happened that each of these sides face domestic political constraints, which makes political compromise nearly impossible. For any compromise to happen, be it on Ukraine's part, be it on Russia part, you need to give up on some of your claims. But this is not going to happen because of the very political reasons that I've already told you. Now let us move to another political factors, that is fear of precedent. Now what would happen in case if all the parties in this conflict agree to let Russia control over its territory, which it has already captured in Ukraine, right? It would set a negative precedent that if you are allowing another party to control an area illegally, similar other bigger powers in the future, most likely China, would use this excuse to commit aggression against Taiwan, right? So this is a kind of precedent that other parties are not willing to create in the global scheme of things. Similarly, on the other hand, let us suppose you humiliate Russia. What would happen? The regime that the Vladimir Putin has created would collapse, and Russia is one of the biggest nuclear power on earth. So it would create domestic instability in Russia, which no parties want because Russia controls a sizable portion of nuclear arsenal in the world. So these are the two possible outcomes, both of which are quite risky for the entire world, right? So this is the another political factors why countries are afraid of achieving a ceasefire right now. Now we have discussed military and political factors. Now let us discuss historical factors. One of the most important historical factors which led to this war in the first hand is the expansion of NATO very close to the borders of Russia. Now, Ukraine's goal has been to secure NATO's as well as EU membership for its long-term security, and this is understood on Ukraine's part. But on the part of Russia, they view this expansion of NATO very close to the borders of Russia. Russia views this as a security threat. So it has done everything to prevent NATO expansion. And that is why Russia's intention was not to let Ukraine join NATO and allow Ukraine to act as a buffer state against the West as well as East. So this is what has happened. You can understand from this map, the darker regions are the countries which became the part of NATO earlier on, and as we move eastwards, the countries in the lighter pictures, particularly this yellow one, which is Ukraine, they have become a member, or they are going to become a member in near future. And this, on the part of Russia, they view it as a security threat. As NATO expands eastward, it becomes closer to the Russia which is located here. So this is one of the important historical factors that has led to start of this war. Now, as this war started, NATO became involved in this conflict, directly and indirectly both. Indirectly, that one of the important members of NATO, Western countries like US, they are providing monetary and military support to Ukraine. So NATO's involvement has created a proxy war dynamics. This war is not just related to Russia and Ukraine right now. On the side of Ukraine, we see NATO is also involved. So this has involved, or this has increased the size of the war. So this ending of the war would require changing the entire security architecture of Europe. Europe, particularly NATO, would have to agree before ending of a war that they would not expand very close to Russia. So this is the historical factor I was talking about. Now let us talk about the geopolitical as well as geostrategic factors, right? Now first I told you Ukraine, on the part of Ukraine, even now NATO is involved. So this war, which is primarily a war between Russia and Ukraine, has become a war between different global parties, or different global stakeholders are now involved in the war. I told you this war has become Russia versus the West, and not just Russia, even countries like China, countries like Iran, they are actively supporting Russia in its war with Ukraine. So now this demonstrates that it has become a war between East, represented by Russia, represented by China, represented by Iran, versus the Western Bloc, which is led by Ukraine, which is actively supported by America, which is actively supported by NATO. So this has created a new Cold War where two parties are fighting, but behind these two parties are bigger stakeholders in the region that are major powers, including US, including China. Now, for any settlement to happen, you need to understand both of these sides needs to balance their scheme of things, which is quite difficult in case they have to maintain their geopolitical prestige. So this is another, particularly the geopolitical and geostrategic factors, which has inhibited the end of this war. Now, let us discuss another factor. Has or why has the mediation attempts failed? Now, for any mediation to achieve or for any conflict resolution to happen, the one who is resolving this conflict needs to have certain qualities. They need to demonstrate neutrality, they need to demonstrate credibility, or they need to have significant leverage over the parties that are involved in the conflict. Now, let us discuss whether neutrality actually happens in the case of mediation. Now, who has tried to do mediation? It is countries like Turkey, it is countries like China. Now, both of these countries were seen to be involved in one side of this conflict. So they were not exactly neutral in nature, and this diminished their credibility. Now, another factor is leverage. Why isn't one party able to establish leverage over both Russia and Ukraine to end this war? This is what we are going to discuss in the next slide. But another parties of this conflict, particularly the European Union, particularly the United States, have also tried to mediate on this conflict. But there are certain political factors which has not lended credibility or neutrality to these countries. First of all, Trump in its outset has declared that I'm going to end the Russia-Ukraine war. But what is the characteristic of Trump? Is Trump's dealings or is Trump's words credible? The answer is no. Is Europe actively involved just with Russia? Yes. So this does not lend credibility. This does not lend neutrality to either of these sides. So when there is no credible or no neutral party to mediate in this conflict, how do you expect this conflict to end, right? So this is the another factor. Now, what I was going to talk about is the region's fragmented response. Now, one of the important multilateral bodies that has the power to end this conflict or has the means to end this conflict is United Nations. But you need to understand Russia is one of the veto power holding members of the United Nations Security Council, which is the only body responsible for implementing the policies passed by United Nations. So that is why United Nations role in this conflict has only remained symbolic. It has not been able to effectively mediate or effectively end this war because of Russia's continued use of veto power. Now, another parties of this conflict are Europe. But I told you, Europe has been actively involved in negotiations with Russia and as well as US. But Europe, on the other hand, has been dependent on large measures on Russia's energy supplies to meet its energy security requirement. So that is why Europe or European Union in particular has not been able to play an effective role. Now let us talk about parties of the global south, including India. Now these countries, including India, don't want this conflict to end principally. Their major intention to end this conflict is to meet their food and energy stability requirement. So when there is no coherent international framework, there is no coherent international party who wants end of this conflict, how do you think the resolution would be achieved, right? Now, another factor that has played an important role is the economic and energy related dimensions. I've told you, Ukraine's economy has been devastated because of this war. So now the question comes, if you are promising end of this conflict, somebody would have to fund for Ukraine's redevelopment, right? And no party, including the US, including the European Union, wants to fund this redevelopment of Ukraine. Now let us talk about Russia. Russia uses its energy exports to fund the war, to finance the war, and it does so by exporting raw materials like crude oil to countries like China and India. And even Europe significantly relies on Russian gas. Now, if Ukraine were to reduce its dependence on Russian gas, it would face political problems because there would be rise in prices of essential goods and services, particularly when winter is near. And sanctions on Russia would have reshaped the global trade, but we have seen countries like India and China Even Gulf state, they've continued to use Russia's military supplies. They've continued to use Russia's raw material like crude oil. And therefore, war outcomes are tied to economic resilience. So when Russia continues to be economically resilient, it has allowed Russia to prolong this war. And when it comes to ending the war on Ukraine's part, they need finances for redevelopment and no one is willing to give it to them. So this is another factor. Now, the question is, will this conflict end soon? Now, you need to understand the war in both of these countries, both in Russia and Ukraine, have deepened the nationalist sentiments. The people who have grown up in these past few years, they have become quite enmeshed into this war and they have faced multiple traumas. They are subjected to different propaganda. So don't you think they would be on extreme sides of this argument? No one is willing to take a middle path. Now, for many Ukrainians, you need to understand they want peace, but this peace shouldn't come at a cost of justice. So they want peace, but not without justice. So for them, both peace and justice, only when these two things happen, then it is only acceptable. Now, for Russians, defeat is unthinkable, particularly for its ruler, Vladimir Putin, because he has invested so much political heft, so much military heft, that even if he's shown to be on losing side, it would be quite a political suicide for him. So even if fighting stops because of the radicalization in the society, because of this nationalist sentiment that has happened, or because of the political stakes both of these parties have, the true reconciliation which we want the peace to take place, not just for few years but for decades, it won't happen. So this is the conclusion of our today's video. You need to understand there are multiple factors that we have discussed and all of them in part have played a role why this war is going on. Now, before moving to the practice question, I have something I wanted you guys to inform that we have started with admissions for 2027 and for 2028 batches, especially for foundation courses. Now, students who are looking to give exams in this particular year, you need to understand you need to have right guidance, you need to have right support, you need to have right content. And all of this you'll get in our foundation batches. So please hurry up. One of our batches is starting on 27th of October. And as October ends, this is the best time for you to start preparing for 2027 or 2028 exam. But before making the payment, please remember one thing. If you use this code now that I've written here, ATS Live, it would get you maximum discounts, not on just 2027 course, also on 2028 courses and also on optional courses. So please keep that in mind. ATS Live is the code which will fetch you maximum discounts. Now let us try to solve this question. Consider the following countries, and there are 6 countries that I've highlighted. How many of the above mentioned countries share a land border with Ukraine? Now the answer to this question lies in the first slide that I saw you of Ukraine, which is the map of Ukraine and what are the bordering countries. So go to that slide. Tell me which are the countries which is bordering it and solve this question. And the ones who answer it correctly in the comment section, I'll give your comments a thumbs up. Also, I want you guys to comment on this video. Tell me, according to you, what are the other factors that I might have missed out on, which has led to prolonged or which has prolonged this war. Okay, so please do let me know in the comments. And once again, if you want to download the notes, they will be made available on this particular Telegram channel. In case if you have problems locating it, you can always scan this QR code. Okay, so this is all from my side. Please have a very good day.